The ogre's legs buckled, yanking Moknij down as it tumbled heavily to the ground. Annoyed over its stubborn refusal to let go of the branch, he aimed a kick at the fallen demi-human. "This stubborn son of a... that will be enough." A new voice turned his attention away. The others also turned their heads as a single figure approached from the direction of the city, dressed in an exquisitely crafted maid outfit bearing similarities to those commonly used by the Sorcerer King's household. Though mostly human in appearance, her head was distinctly not. Her face had the appearance of a dog, stitched together like some sort of patchwork doll that children might find endearing. "I have deemed that one side has been rendered entirely incapable of fighting," she announced. "This exercise is at an end." Before anyone could respond, the maid spread her arms to cast a spell. Widen magic, all greater heal. Streams of radiant energy fell over the field, caressing the prone figures in the combat area around them. Each stirred and slowly stood from where they had fallen. The adventurers who had fought all the way to the end gaped at the effects of the spell. As everyone regained their feet, Blair stammered for several moments before finally managing to speak. "Heal is a 6th-tier spell." His voice was filled with awe. "Only divine casters of legend could manage it. This, I don't even know what." "All greater heal is a 9th-tier spell," the maid replied, making her way over to the ogre that Jocelyn had downed in his overwhelming assault. "It will not recover the slain, however." She looked down at the corpse for a moment, then took a step back. "True resurrection." Before their eyes, the battered ogre opened its eyes and struggled to its feet. Though it looked somewhat shaky, it bore none of the brutal punishment that Jocelyn had inflicted upon it. Blair's knees folded under him, and he looked up from the ground. "Who are you?" he asked weakly. "I've never seen, no, I've never even heard of such powerful magic. This is the purview of the gods." "Is that so?" the maid replied with a mysterious smile on her veiled face. "Well, far be it from me to make any claims to godhood. I am Pestania, a humble servant of His Majesty the Sorcerer King, Woof. As I am currently stationed in the city, I have been instructed to provide support for the Adventurer Guild when necessary. Rest assured, you need not worry overly much in your training. As you can see, even death is but a temporary setback." Pestania made to return towards the city, but paused and turned back momentarily to deliver an afterthought. "I would advise against being overly reckless, however. As you may know, resurrection services carry various costs. The material expenses are currently allocated as a part of the Adventurer Guild's budget, but your guildmaster may have some unkind things to say if you squander his resources, Woof." As Pestania's figure receded into the distance, the combatants looked around to each other somewhat uncomfortably until a woman popped out of the grass, startling the two ogres nearby. "Yeah, that was really something, wasn't it? Mary," the missing member of Rainbow said with a note of satisfaction in her voice. "I haven't had that much fun in a while." The unofficial strongest member of Rainbow, Mary, was an Orichalcum rank ranger. A combatant who specialized in hunting the undead of Katza Plains, she was also a generally devastating force on her favored terrain. Seeing that she had vanished the instant the fighting broke out, Moknij had worked on the hunch that she would eventually track down and eliminate all of their opponents hidden in the grass. The first indication that his wager had paid off was the abrupt cessation of the attacks from the two concealed archers. "How many were there?" Jocelyn asked curiously. There were 2 archers, 2 mages, they were easy." She looked around at the aftermath of the battle. The goblin with the spear was pretty tough to take out. "Wasn't there another one?" "Yeah, there was a cleric near the ogres keeping them alive while they were fighting. I could only get in close after you charged in. We knocked each other out though." Mary laughed, pulling blades of loose grass out of her nest of unruly red hair. Her disposition always seemed to match her name, making her appear much younger than she probably was. She was an adventurer that had worked out of Irantal for as long as its people could remember, a wild, battle maniac of an elf who could never settle on a number for her age. Nearly all the members of the training exercise were headed for the city at this point, except for one. While Pestania's magic had returned everyone to a healthy state, it did not free the entangled noblewoman. Entwined from head to toe, save for her nose which peeked out from a small gap in the vines, she had seemingly sensed that combat had ended and occasionally tried to wiggle free. She couldn't struggle much, as she was bound up with a spear and bowstaff flat against her body, and it made her look something like a caterpillar on a twig. "I've never seen a twine plant spell last for this long," Blair noted as Mochnage threw the noble-turned caterpillar over his shoulder again. "Could it be that even that young elf lass is a powerful druid?" "Don't ask me," Mochnage grunted as he shifted his weight. "I don't even know what to think anymore. Shouldn't a druid know better than a fighter like me?" Several people awaited the returning adventurers as they approached the city gates along the wall, looking out towards the group. The Dark Elf siblings, Guildmasters Pluton Eintzak and Theoraxia, and a goblin in grand silken robes holding a feathered white fan. Mochnage set his burden down before he walked up to the awaiting group. "Oi, Mare," the Dark Elf boy jabbed his sister with an elbow. "Or?" She jumped, startled. "What? Why?" Her brother gestured towards the entangled noble on the ground with his chin. The Dark Elf girl motioned with her staff and the vines withered away, their remaining fragments disappearing into the soil. Finally free of her constraints, the negotiator who had become a casualty for the entire battle collected her things. Under the combined scrutiny of the assembled adventurers, she made herself scarce with a mortified expression. Mochnage turned his attention back to the matter at hand. "Well," he said with a hopeful voice, "we survived. What do we win?" Eintzak sighed. The adventurers were dismissed to clean themselves up and the party leaders reconvened later that afternoon. Around the large meeting table on the second floor of the Adventurer Guild were Mochnage, Blair, Jocelyn and Mary from Rainbow, the wizard Ilan and Utrecht, the gold-plate fighter that had been taken down by the magic arrow barrage. The group that had awaited them at the gate was also present. "Where's that healer, Pestonia, was it?" Mochnage turned his head to glance towards the stairs. "The other girl from the ruins as well, they're not coming?" "Pestonia went back to help oversee the construction of the new orphanage," the elf boy answered him. "Shaltira's working on her assignment from Lord Ines. She was just dropping off some things for the tomb." The familiarity by which he spoke of the Sorcerer King made Mochank realize that these two elves were also probably from the Sorceress Kingdom's mysterious place of origin. No one that he had spoken to seemed to know where that was, exactly. As far as most people knew, he had made some sort of claim on Eranthal, one which nobody had the slightest clue about, even Mary. "And you are?" "This is Aura," Eintzak filled in, "and her brother, Mare. The other gentleman here is the Goblin Strategist. I met him a few days ago and he agreed to help out with the guild's training once in a while." The Goblin Strategist lowered his head respectfully in greeting. The two Dark Elf children simply stood and waited. Eh? Mary rose from her seat. "This cutie is a boy?" Mary leaned towards Mare to examine him more closely. "This works?" She tilted her head curiously. "Yes, it works. He. The boy dressed in girl's clothing shrunk away from Mary's intense gaze, leaning away to cower behind his sister. Eintzak cleared his throat. "You can do this later," he spoke in a serious tone. "We have work to do." "That's right." Aura put her hands on her hips with a cross expression. "What was that, even?" "I advised against throwing adventurers straight into something like this," Eintzak said. "They still need to get a feel for each of the other members, as well as the new way we do things. I'll agree that the whole exercise went much worse than I had expected, though. It was terrible." Aura slapped a hand on the table repeatedly. 30 adventurers against 9 goblins and ogres, and only 7 of you survived. That's including the casualty that no one even bothered finishing off. This is no good. The new Adventurer Guild won't be able to do work like this." "The projected distribution of losses was spot on in this case, however," said the Goblin Strategist. "This exercise was to simulate a case where an adventurer contingent ran afoul of a small but moderately strong tribe of demi-humans. I believe several points presented beforehand were proven to be valid, and few other things have been learned." "I agree," Eintzak followed up on the strategist's words with a nod. "The training goals I outlined before we started address the issues we saw today. Many of the ranking standards of the old Adventurer Guild are still relevant to our new mandate. With the support provided by His Majesty, we can ensure that adventurers fielded in future expeditions are prepared for scenarios far worse than this. If the entire contingent was at least gold-ranked, familiar with their teams, and well-versed with our operations, this outcome would never have happened, probably." As he finished speaking, Eintzak's gaze turned to Moknich. "Ah, that's right, boss," Mary laughed. "I couldn't say anything back when it happened since it would have blown my cover, but trying to flush out the goblins like that was pretty a dumb cool. You got played on your home turf." Beside him, Blair nodded in agreement while Ilan looked like she was trying her best to become one with her chair. Moknich screwed up his face in confusion. "Wait, you mean that entire thing was planned?" The way Aura started things off, it sounded like she was improvising. "Well, it was a surprise for the tail end of the exercise," the goblin strategist replied. "A little bit of excitement after your basic orientation in the tomb. The group under my orders still needed to improvise the new ambush to press the contingent into making rash decisions." Moknich thought back on the sequence of events again and realized where he had screwed up. The wind over the area nearly always came down from the Azalizia foothills to the north. Lighting the field on fire in an attempt to expose or drive away their ambushers had ultimately backfired on them, and the situation had descended into chaos after that point. You worked that out in advance?" Moknich gave the goblin strategist a look of appraisal. "That's pretty damn good." "Ho ho ho, you flatter me," the strategist waved his fan lightly. "Knowing how to use fire is one of the basics of the art of war, after all. In truth, it was the mages in the field that should have started the fires, but, since you had willingly sabotaged your own position so thoroughly, they had the spare mana to aid an offense." Utrecht winced to the memory. Silence hung over the table. In their first training exercise, the adventurers had made an embarrassingly poor showing. Never mind starting off on good footing towards their stated mandate of exploration, their first step had them land flat on their faces. The operational procedures of the Adventurer Guild's expeditions, well, the initial outlines drawn up with input from several of the Sorcerer King's representatives and a few knowledgeable members of the city's guilds where their expertise was warranted, used various concepts which were each easy enough to understand on their own. As a whole, however, they had been woven into a fusion of exploration, diplomacy and projection of national interests which was unprecedented in the history of the Adventurer Guild. A contingent of regular teams would be dispatched to an unexplored area, where they would establish an expeditionary camp. The 5 teams assigned to that contingent would use this camp as their base of operations and, over the course of time, work together to compile a comprehensive understanding of the region. This was not simply creating a map of an unexplored area, it was also a thorough assessment of its native populations, cultures, politics, flora and fauna, as well as its economic and strategic potential. With this being the case, the Adventurer Guild was now recruiting members to include those who possessed the expertise to fulfill various aspects of an operation rather than the previous methods where martial or magical prowess was the sole qualification. The teams sent out as a part of these contingents would be at bare minimum trained to gold rank, which was currently deemed resilient enough to weather most of the hardships expected from such work. If it was deemed a higher risk area, higher ranked teams would be assigned. In special cases, a 6th team would be sent out, consisting of a group handpicked by the Sorcerer's Kingdom to support the effort and assist in resolving any outstanding issues. Moknich had heard of ventures somewhat similar to these expeditions over the years, carried out by illegal workers and funded by wealthy interests, but what the Sorcerer's Kingdom proposed was far above and beyond any such isolated attempts to pilfer wealth and garner fame. The creation of this organization that would, in the future, send countless expeditions staffed by highly trained adventurers to the far reaches of the world. It was an effort that could only be sustained by a nation, one that was on par with maintaining a powerful standing army. The day that Eintzak had called together the guild, several members had called it exactly that, an army. High-ranking adventurers had the effective strength of mundane armies on their own, and it was difficult for them to accept that so many of these individuals would be organized into an arm of the government. This was central to the reason why the original Adventurer Guild traditionally held itself above the politics of nations, and now that same tradition was being challenged. Many feared that they would simply be a thinly veiled vanguard, a scouting force for future aggression by the armies of the Sorcerer King into the territories of prospective targets. A significant portion of the membership had left the city due to this break with accepted practice, but some had still been drawn into the tantalizing vision shared by Pluton Eintzak. Moknich had wondered what the Sorcerer King had planned when he first mentioned it over a week ago, but now he held the firm belief that no one that called themselves an adventurer could help but feel the draw of his words. To the eldest and most experienced amongst them, his invitation had hit the hardest. They had been in the guild for too long, seen too much, understanding that, without the support of the Sorceress Kingdom, the romanticized life of adventuring that many ascribed to their profession was simply a dream within a dream. Understanding this, that this dream could now become reality, had sparked an ember he had long thought dead inside. Directly witnessing the resources that the Sorceress Kingdom could bring to bear, that ember had been nourished into a flame which entrenched Mocknidge's conviction that this dream had become an inevitability. The Adventurer Guild of Eranthal, once merely one amongst countless other branches, would become the Adventurer Guild, and all others would become little more than a shallow pretender to the name. For this dream, Mocknidge was willing to take any amount of punishment, undergo any trial. Here, adventurers in name would become adventurers in truth, to the awe and envy of the world. "We can do this," Mocknidge said resolutely, clenching his fist. "By the gods, we can do this. Everything is in place, everything is within our grasp. All we need to do is follow the plan and get our members to standard." "This is surely the case," the goblin strategist agreed. Once their lower-level charges were out of the picture, the remaining members had no issues dealing with the ambush. I dare say they had already put their plan into action before that, using the very environment we were exploiting against us. If this can be seen as a representation of what an adventurer contingent is capable of, they should have few issues dealing with the disorganized tribes that have been observed in the great forest of Tob closest to the northern borders of this duchy. The proposed standard of gold seems an eminently fair assessment for the threshold where they can commence local operations. Several others around the table voiced their agreement. "You have reservations, Ilan?" Eintzak said. The platinum rank wizard, who had been silent for most of the exchange, started, looking up at the faces around the table. The catch is that it assumes that all the new adventurers we train up are just like us, right?" She began slowly, her hazel eyes unfocused in thought. "But even if we get them up to speed with hard training, there's still the matter of learning spells, putting together equipment and picking up other magic items. It takes us years to collect all that stuff, and that's with Eranthal being a major trade hub. Merchant traffic from the Empire should pick up at some point, but I doubt the Theocracy or Easties will allow merchants to carry anything valuable that we would want into the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Even for us veterans, there are problems. A lot of us are specialized for one thing or another, and we'll have to learn new spells and gather new equipment sets for what we're going to be doing in the future." Ilan's points were all valid ones. Eranthal flourished as a hub of the land trade between three nations, who were each a gateway to other markets even further abroad. With the current disposition of the neighboring states, the trade in magic-related goods that the city received would be mostly from the Empire. Rather than the trade hub that it had been, the city was now more akin to the end of a small trade route that branched out from the Empire. That it was equipment for adventurers made it exponentially worse than simply importing utility items for civilian use, as items used by adventurers tended to be highly customized or at least found suitable for the specific niches that they were sought for. "We lost a lot in the weeks after Katza," Eintzak admitted. Magic equipment, scrolls and other items were purposely moved out of the city by various people, and many of our former members left the city with their own equipment and collections as well. It's true that restoring that end of things will take a long time if we leave things as they are. Does His Majesty have something in mind concerning this?" Everyone looked to Aura and Mare. It'll all work out somehow, won't it?" Aura said with her arms behind her head. "You should just trust Lord Dines on this. I'm sure he has something in the works already." It wasn't really an answer, but there was no reason to doubt her words. To those who had a sense for it, all of the subordinates of the Sorcerer King, down to even the household servants, appeared to be adorned in powerful magic equipment. Securing a reliable source of spells and various items was surely a minor matter by comparison. May looked to his sister and he opened and closed his mouth several times, appearing like he wanted to say something. Aura shot him an annoyed look. Anyways. There was a great deal of uncertainty carried in Mare's voice. Or was that how he spoke normally? Mocknidge hadn't seen him speak with much confidence at all in the past few hours. "We should start as soon as possible," Mare told them. "The starting sections of the training area are still being expanded, but a few segments for copper and iron rank adventurers are ready to be used. We don't have the right iron ranks to make a proper party, so we should focus on getting the copper adventurers to iron so then they can get going as well. It was a straightforward plan that left little room for debate. Copper ranks traditionally experienced the highest rate of turnover in the high-stakes career of adventuring. Whether they found they weren't cut out for it, discovered that it did not match their expectations or simply died in some unglamorous way, it was not a rank at which one stayed for long. As one of the changes to the Adventurer Guild, all members received a stipend for their living expenses in order to keep them as part of the available pool of party members for future expeditions. Though unlikely to happen, it inadvertently created a possibility where one could stay at Copper for an indefinite period of time by not taking the initiative to advance. Mochnich agreed that this was a situation to avoid, and thought that filtering out new recruits quickly by pushing them through training was the prudent course of action. They should be put through their paces and advanced to iron as quickly as possible. Those that were incapable of doing so would be discharged and a suitable use for their abilities would be found in civilian life. Since it was known that copper ranks generally did not survive attempts at resurrection, it was also actually the riskiest period for the guild's members. It was due to this fact that the pace of training for new members would be slow, in order to minimize unnecessary risks and accidentally lose promising recruits. As the Adventurer Guild grew in renown, the influx of hopeful applicants could potentially result in a sort of bottleneck in the training process. Mary raised her hand and everyone turned their attention to her. It was a strange habit of hers, but it always seemed to work for some reason. "You got anything for us?" she asked hopefully. "I'm ready to go too." The members of Rainbow made groaning noises. Mochnich hoped the idea that death was no longer an obstacle had not turned her into even more of a battle maniac than she already was. Being a ranger that specialized in hunting the undead, she had driven her team to wit's end during the tense weeks after Erantle was annexed. She would quietly stare out of the window of the team's accommodations, sizing up all the undead patrolling the city. Mary would talk to no one in particular while fiddling with her expensive magical arrows, saying things like "See that clueless lich flying around? One shot. Or that cocky one with the shield, I can take him." Even the usually calm Jocelyn was plainly on edge after days of wondering whether she would just start attacking undead from their apartment window, and Mochnich had decided it would be safer to just bring them to the Adventurer Guild every day instead. Every time someone said tomb, he was afraid to look in her direction, imagining her excitement over having an unlimited source of undead to destroy for training. "Well," Aura replied, "there is something, but the floors have been arranged for parties of 6. If just the 4 of you go into an area meant for 6 mithril ranks, you'll probably die." She looked over their team, her eyes pausing at each member before moving on again. "Except for her," she motioned to Mary. "She can probably get away. The rest of you are dead for sure, though." Do we really have to die?" Blair asked. "Seems a bit extreme, being training and all." "Huh? You think anyone out to get you when you're on an expedition is going to go all easy on you?" "Well, no, but how much does resurrection magic cost, anyways?" Utrecht asked. "If I recall correctly, Lakew's from Blue Rose charges quite a lot for it." "A lot," answered Einsack. "You really don't want to know. If it wasn't for the subsidy from the Sorceress Kingdom, you'd be paying back the cost of the cheapest resurrection over years with the earnings of a gold rank." Utrecht swallowed upon hearing the guildmaster's words. "What do you mean by the cheapest?" Ilan shifted in her seat slightly and leaned forward. "What's the difference?" "Well, it's not exactly a secret for Raised Dead, but, if I have it right, it's a pretty big hit to your effectiveness as an adventurer that you'll have to make up for with training. As I understand it, the effect is significantly reduced the higher the tier of the spell, but it also becomes exorbitantly expensive at the highest tier. We settled on 7th tier resurrection as the best balance between cost and rehabilitation time. It's around twice as expensive as Raised Dead, but it also comes with fewer restrictions in case something unexpected happens." The absurdity of Einsack's words only seemed to be matched by the ridiculousness of how smoothly the members around the table digested everything, though it was probably more likely that no one truly could. A couple of months ago, not in Mocknige's wildest dreams would anyone be settling for a 7th tier spell, a realm of magic considered beyond human reach. Now, magics beyond what one would consider legendary were being incorporated into the Adventurer Guild's planning, and the only points which could be discussed were the results of such magic and their budgetary concerns. Even when presented to their faces, the power of the Sorceress Kingdom was so far removed from their previous reality that Moknich thought only legends could appreciate the full weight of everything. The more ignorant one was of such things, the more insulated they were from the truth. Never mind what went into being able to cast resurrection or true resurrection, Moknich's mind could only frame it the same way Einsak had, more expensive versions of the only spell they could relate it to, with fewer downsides. By and large, the people of the Sorceress Kingdom were all in a similar state of mind. They were like ants building a nest in the cracks of a city street, uncomprehending of the civilization towering around them. At any rate, Einsak told them, try not to die, it's expensive. If the administration sees a spike in resurrection costs, they're going to start wondering if we're being frivolous with their subsidy. We've also considered using raised dead for people repeatedly dying in stupid ways that they shouldn't be. We'll be putting them through hell and back to make sure it doesn't happen again. I wonder what Blue Rose does to get their members back up to full fighting strength, Utrecht wondered. Beats me, Jocelyn said. It's probably not a stroll through a garden, though. If it's really that expensive, Ilan said, shouldn't we try to avoid training deaths? You can do a lot with that kind of coin. That's true, said Einsak. The money could go to securing magic items through trade channels, or something along those lines. What do you think? Einsak turned his head to look at Aura beside him, whose lips had formed into a pouty frown. I think they have a point, big sis, Mare said to her side. Ah, whatever. Aura threw up her hands. I don't know why I'm the one that has to answer everything anyways. The tomb is Mare's job, I just came to help out. She rounded on her brother with a hand on her hip. Just make sure you don't keep Lord Ines waiting for your results. Wah. Saying that isn't fair, big sis. As his sister got up and turned to leave, Mare looked down to his lap making a worried you sound. Well, the goblin strategist said as he slid off his chair and onto his feet, I believe I shall take my leave as well. When's our next match? Moknich asked as the strategist walked around the table. Ho, you wish to challenge us again? The strategist responded, his mouth hidden by his fan. Leaving it at this would be unsatisfying, Moknich smirked. Next time, we won't be such poor hosts. Well, it would be best if you reach the standard that you've outlined before we face each other again. The goblin strategist nodded. I have many more new recruits that would be glad for the chance to test their mettle, and I believe there will be much to learn for both sides. I will look forward to our next match. He descended down the stairs lightly, leaving Mare with the members of the Adventurer Guild. So, what was the takeaway from all that? Jocelyn wondered. That we're on the right track, Einsak said. Now, all we need to do is follow through and prove it. I'll get a copper team together. We can start after dinner, if that's all right with you. I'll be waiting, Mare nodded. I'd like to watch how things go, Moknich said. Is there any way to do that? There's a place where people can watch what's going on, Einsak replied. I wanted you six to come along, anyways. We can meet there when everything's ready. Einsak looked around at the remaining members. I trust that no one wants to miss this. Good. We'll meet in a few hours. I'll send out runners after I figure out what this team will look like. The meal is growing cold, my lady. Ludmilla reached out absently for her spoon. The congealed porridge came out in a sticky clump over her spoon, and she left the utensil in her mouth as she continued to work through one document after another at the dining room table. The Adventurer Guild exercise had taken up hours of her day, starting late in the morning. The participants went their separate ways in the mid-afternoon, after they were dismissed to review on the events of the session. After a thorough scrubbing and a fresh change of clothes, the odor of charred grass still clung to her, and the sensation of the vines that had constricted themselves around her body still remained. At least someone had been nice enough to heal her after she had been painfully kicked in her helpless state. Placing the spoon back in its porcelain bowl, Ludmilla sighed at the fresh memory of her misadventure with the Adventurer Guild. She had been strung up and smoked like a piece of meat, essentially useless for whatever had happened. It certainly wasn't a good first impression to make, and she dreaded the reception that awaited her the next time she participated in their activities. During her time away since the morning, Nonna Zimp had scribed a small pile of documents, reports, requests and questions passed from the Elder Lich in Warden's Vale to the city manor through her familiar. Communications from her attaché did not come at a set time or pace, instead arriving whenever there was new information to convey and added to the long scroll of notes on the continuous stream of pages. Day or night, rain or shine, the imp would scribe the information from its perch. She had found what she thought was supposed to be a wooden stand for pet birds in the plaza markets, in the letter room as long as it had the means to do so. It was a pile of tasks better taken care of sooner rather than later, and it was beyond the idea that she needed to have it done before the various workshops and other businesses around the city would close for the day. With their late start to the season, nearly every fief in the duchy was pressing the city with their demands for spring goods. Shortfalls in the human workforce that had fled from the territories had been promptly shored up with requests for undead labor, and the demand for tools and various other pieces of equipment remained roughly the same as the previous year. It appeared that many nobles were indeed struggling with balancing undead laborers with tenants, however, as nowhere near the number of them that could potentially have been fielded were, as far as she had heard, anyways. With the 6-odd-week gap where the citizens of the Sorceress Kingdom awaited, uncertain of their future, came a massive backlog of orders from the various industries throughout the duchy, which was in turn suffering from shortages of skilled labor and raw materials that were usually imported from other regions. Compounding this problem even further was the fact that an entire city quarter was now slated for reconstruction, creating competition for resources that were already scarce. The heavier work in the quarter was accomplished by large stone golems sourced by the Sorceress Kingdom, but the project still drew away hundreds of artisans, architects, carpenters, masons and engineers. It was finding these professional craftsmen that was Ludmilla's most pressing concern for her domain. The trickle of migration to her domain would fill all of the available housing by the end of the season, and any new arrivals would start having to live in tents. It was not the welcome she wanted to give to the precious few people that she managed to attract to her far-flung territory. She needed skilled labor who could build warm and sturdy homes for her people, as well as new warehouses, silos and watch stations for the new settlements. She needed to start work on the smithy and the mill. She needed to refurbish the old roads and bridges. She had no idea where to even look for a shipwright in the landlocked duchy. As all these needs for the fief piled upon her, the inexorable march of time continued. At one point she had sent a message to Lady Sholtier, hoping that her liege knew of some way to secure any, or knew anyone who did. She had simply replied that the resources that she knew of, used by Lady Yora in the past to construct some basic structures, had been snatched away for the work in the new demi-human quarter by the Guardian Overseer. Lady Albedo was now styled the Prime Minister of the Sorceress Kingdom in order for her position to be more easily understood by the local human populations of the region. The information passed on to the nobles a few days earlier gave Ludmilla hope that she could perhaps bring in expertise from other lands, but that would need to wait until the new relationship between the Sorceress Kingdom and the Empire was made public and traffic between the two nations resumed in full. The nobility had entered into a frenzy at the news and the preparations ordered for the duchy. The near-term policies for improving the overall state of the realm, matters of presentation and prestige, were, at long last, something they could comfortably wrap their heads around, something they could apply themselves towards with zeal in the vast sea of change. Admittedly, it was not something that Ludmilla could grasp as well as the others. Fortunately, her own domain was far from anywhere that visitors to the city would travel through. For her part, it made finding the people that she needed for development even harder. At least she had little to worry about when it came to revenues. So far it seemed that the projections for her crops were roughly on track, which would leave her with an unprecedented amount of capital to work with after she delivered the summer harvest. Related to this was the matter of taxes. She had not broached the subject with Lady Sholtier yet, but it was a regular clause in the contract between liege and vassal. As basic and essential as it was, however, she felt hollow with the idea that it was the only thing she could offer. The history of their short relationship so far could be summed up as Ludmilla knowing too little and needing too much, a one-sided dependency on Lady Sholtier and the resources of the Sorceress Kingdom rather than the proper relationship between noble and liege. Her duty and purpose as a frontier noble had been rendered utterly obsolete by the realities of the Sorceress Kingdom, leaving behind an empty void at the core of her identity. Even with her daily life pressing her with tasks she only had just enough time to attend to, it seemed to gnaw away at her very soul, a hunger insatiable by the endless march of day-to-day administrative tasks. Ludmilla shoved the selfish worries that came uninvited back into their hiding place. She finished one document, added it to the pile and picked up a new one, continuing to sort through the information scrawled on the sequence of parchments and writing out the appropriate instructions and orders to be delivered to the city's merchants. She was 2/3 of the way through, but she just knew that there would be 1 or 2 more awaiting her in the letter room when she finished these off. "Let's see," she said without looking up from her work. "Check the letter room for anything new." "Right away, my lady," her maid replied. Riestais had always been a nation where information only traveled as fast as it could be physically delivered. Warden's Vale would normally need to wait nearly 2 weeks for information to travel to Erantal and back. Communication between the city and her domain now, however, was as fast as Nonna's familiar, whose mind was linked to its faraway master, could scribe it. The smooth flow of information that resulted changed many things for the better, but it came with its own pitfalls as well. Ludmilla suspected she would need to hire assistants at some point to help organize and regulate the flow of information, as she seemed to be developing terrible habits surrounding it. The undead did not require rest, so Nonna would work at all hours of the day, meaning that information could come in at all hours of the day. While Ludmilla was in the city, she would constantly check the letter room for anything new. She even found herself laying awake at night wondering what news the imp had added to be read in the morning, resisting the temptation to head down and take a look. Considering Nonna's generally excellent performance, she could probably do with another elder lich for the city manor once it was busy enough to justify. It would certainly free up a significant amount of time. Only important decisions would need Ludmilla's input once the new assistant got used to things. Hopefully Nonna wouldn't get jealous. Perhaps she would be glad for a colleague. "There were 2 more, my lady," Amelia said as she returned to the dining room table. Ludmilla glanced over the new arrivals. Like the others, each was filled with an assortment of information that Nonna had deemed worth reporting. In addition to an elder lich for city business, converting the hall of the manor into a proper office would also be necessary. She imagined that a year's worth of this paperwork would fill several large shelves and require dozens of binders to organize the information into. As her domain grew, it would probably turn into a small archive. After several more minutes, she was finally caught up with her work. Taking a deep breath and releasing it, she reviewed the outgoing documents one last time before addressing Amelia. "Have Rodney take these 3 to the Merchant Guild," Ludmilla indicated one set of orders for goods and replacement parts. With the chaotic atmosphere that accompanied the frenzied activity of the duchy, the Merchant Guild had taken it upon itself to organize its members' activity to meet the ever-growing demands that the city faced. Orders need only be delivered to the guild, and the appropriate businesses that were available would bid on the work. It was a godsend, as Ludmilla had not found merchants to hire for her own domain yet. She would be constantly trying to second-guess every transaction if not for this. "Sent Terence to deliver this to the Wagner Manor," she indicated a freshly sealed letter, then an application form, "and this one to the civil office. The rest are for Nonna." 2 human footmen had been hired on by her housekeeper though, at a certain point before that, Ludmilla was uncertain that she even needed them. Once the maids had become accustomed to working with the 2 death knights that had originally come alongside them, the results convinced her that there would be few problems employing them in the full capacity of footmen for her household. Various places around the city begged to differ, however. When she used them to perform official duties around the city, they worked extraordinarily well, too well, in fact. Ludmilla had sent one to deliver various orders to the Merchant Guild weeks before, and it experienced little wait time since it scattered the queue with its presence. She received a barrage of complaints from various interests around the city after that, and the 2 footmen were hired as a result, human servants that were required since many were still unable to interact with the undead. As her own people became accustomed to them over time, she imagined that the citizens would eventually as well, but foreigners that she might need to deal with in the future were another matter entirely. As Amelia left to send the human footman off, one of the Death Knights appeared at the entrance to the dining room. Her maid took a message into her hands and, after dismissing it with a word of thanks, she turned back around to deliver it to Ludmilla. "It's from the Adventurer Guild, my lady," Amelia said, placing the piece of paper to the side of Ludmilla's work. Ludmilla reached over to pick up the folded note, flipping it open to read over the contents. "They're requesting my presence at the guild hall in 30 minutes, she set down the note. "It seems that they aren't done with exercises for the day." "Will you be attending, my lady?" Amelia asked. Her lady's maid was ecstatic when she first learned that her mistress would be joining the Adventurer Guild, headed off to fulfill whatever wildly gallant vision she had of her. Despite their time together, Amelia had apparently not given up on building up some fantastical image of her mistress. "Yes, of course," Ludmilla replied. "We'll need to prepare immediately. Bring my equipment to the solar, I'll be right along." Amelia left the room and Ludmilla rose from her seat, quickly collecting the scattered documents from around the table and sorting them out into their associated folders. Work in hand, she headed up to her bedchambers, leaving her cold meal behind.